What's up, guys? Welcome to Metal Vibes, and today we are going to be ranking the albums of the Peruvian death metal torchbearers, Mortem. So last week I ranked Morbid Angel's albums, so I thought it'd be fun this week to talk about a band that is kind of considered South America's answer to Morbid Angel, or at least has produced a lot of albums that sound like what Morbid Angel would have sounded like, I think, if they had kept producing albums like Altars of Madness. Mortem are a death metal band from Peru that formed way back in 1986. The band was founded by two brothers, Fernan Naberos, who is the group's vocalist and guitarist, and Alvaro Amdusquius, who is the band's drummer, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering those names. They've had a few other members over the years, but those brothers have really been the core lineup of the group. Together, they would release one demo in 1989 and a few demos in the early 90s before releasing their debut album, Demon Tales, in 1995. So throughout their career, Mortem have always delivered that underground occult death metal sound that you hear in Sadistic Intent and early Morbid Angel, and I think that's more true than ever with Demon Tales. The sound here consists of clattering fast drums, really raw and twisted riffing, these guttural and raspy vocals, and all of those elements just kind of combine together to convey this sense of Lovecraftian darkness. That dark atmosphere is aided by both an unpolished production job, as well as the songs themselves, which take a lot of weird twists and turns and don't always have very obvious hooks in them. Listening to this album is kind of like rushing through a dark underground passageway that's only sporadically lit by a few torches here and there, and you're just kind of rushing through the darkness trying to find your way through. In terms of guitar work here, there's a lot of wild solos, down-tuned tremolos, thrashy riffs, and also a good bit of slow and lurching riffs as well. I wouldn't say there's a huge amount of variety on Demon Tales, but there definitely are some songs that stand out, particularly the title track, which combines an esoteric melody with some groovy riffs and some thrashy riffs for good measure. Then you have the song Ungai Mammon, Mother of Disease, which has some creepy clean guitars and some doomy sustained notes. On the vocal front, Vomit of the Earth mixes things up a little bit with some really guttural vocals that almost sound like brutal death metal. The song Demonolatry is a late album highlight for me with these evil gyrating notes, and then the closing track Tormented by the Undead really stands out to me too, which has some frantic intervals that kind of remind me of Slayer, and a lot of other really great riffs in that song as well. I will say Demon Tales is definitely not the kind of album that's going to hook you right away. You kind of need to sit down and listen to it and explore its nooks and crannies, but I think that makes for a fun experience, even if it's not the most accessible album out there. I think some more variety and standout moments wouldn't have hurt, but I would say overall, this is an excellent death metal album with a real sense of mystery to it and a really great atmosphere. It's not my favorite Mortem release, but it is definitely up there, so I'll put it in the number 2 spot for now. So Demon Tales was originally released by a Peruvian label, but it would actually be re-released by Germany's Merciless Records in 1996, and Merciless Records would also release the band's second album, 1998's The Devil Speaks in Tongues. So sort of a lineup shift with this album. Alvaro co-wrote many of these songs, but for some reason did not appear on drums for this album, and I'm not really sure why. Stylistically, however, this pretty much continues with that thrashy occult death metal sound that you heard on Demon Tales. Production-wise, I think the guitars on this album have a little bit more bass to them, and the vocals just sound a little bit more garbled to me, which I think is actually fine. I don't mind that at all. In terms of the contents of this album consists of a lot of new songs, a lot of re-recordings from the band's demo years, and also a cover of the song Turn in Your Grave, which was originally written by the Canadian thrash metal band Sacrifice. What's interesting about The Devil Speaks in Tongues is that even though a lot of these songs aren't new, this album still feels like a progression and an improvement over Demon Tales to me. I think a big reason for that is that a lot of these songs feel really well written. They still have those twists and turns that you had in the debut, but those twists and turns are anchored by more standout moments, more vocal hooks and riffs that just kind of pop out more and drag you in better. The song Demons Haunt Loudon is an excellent example of that, with some really winding tremolo riffs that almost remind me of Angel Corpse, and then this kind of simple melodic riff that almost reminds me of Vital Remains, all packaged in less than a 3-minute runtime. This is by far one of my favorite Mortem songs. The opening track, Fiat Obscuritas, is also pretty cool. It's got some bouncy riffing and some swirling tremolo riffs. And in terms of vocal hooks, I think Uma, Flying Head of the Witch, definitely stands out to me with a chorus that is quite memorable. A lot of songs on this album also have a thrashier feel, particularly songs like Zombie Plague and Succubus, which just feel a lot more direct and less difficult to follow than some of the band's other material. There's also some cool touches on this album, like the harmonized leads in the title track, and this track also features some lyrics in the language Quechua. Quechua is an ancient language that was apparently spoken in the Andes, so I think including that on this track kind of adds to that occult atmosphere that the band are conjuring. I also love the closing track, Moon of Cannibalism, which has these squawking notes that kind of remind me of Morbid Angels, Blessed Are the Sick, particularly the faster tracks on that album. I will say the Sacrifice cover on this album does feel a little bit out of place, and I think that could have been left out. But other than that, I really don't have any quibbles. This is a absolutely fantastic death metal album. And even at 53 minutes, I really enjoy every second of this. This is just an absolutely incredible death metal album, and if you like early Morbid Angel, Sadistic Intent, any bands in that vein, this is an absolutely must-listen. This is my personal favorite Mortem album, and it goes right to the top. Alright, so following The Devil Speaks in Tongues, Mortem would release their third album in 2000, Decomposed by Possession. This was also released via Merciless Records, although it would be the band's final Merciless Records release. This is also the most obscure Mortem release. This is the only one of the band's first 3 albums that hasn't been reissued, which makes it pretty difficult to find for a cheap price. In terms of the lineup on this album, Alvaro would return on drums, although not for all of the songs. For some reason, on the first 4 songs, the band featured the same drummer that was featured on The Devil Speaks in Tongues. And again, I'm not really sure why. Production-wise, pretty much the same as the previous album. The vocals are maybe a little sharper. But I would say stylistically, the biggest difference between Decomposed by Possession and the 2 prior albums is that this album is much tighter. Whereas The Devil Speaks in Tongues was a 53-minute album and Demon Tales was a 46-minute album, Decomposed by Possession is only 37 minutes. Along with that shorter runtime, you get shorter songs that are more direct with less twists and turns. But in spite of that, I really don't think this album is lacking at all. This, to me, is just another excellent release. It's really clear they improved as songwriters because there's some really great riffs and hooks on this album. I think you hear that right from the opening track, Death Rules Supreme, which has some stringy riffs and buzzing tremolos, which break into a standout chorus. To me, this is one of the band's best songs. The songs Deviled and Noctivagance are also both really cool songs with these really fast and harrowing chords that manage to be thrashy while still conveying a frightening atmosphere. Hell and Beyond and Morgue Rapist are both pretty notable for their catchy choruses. And then you have stuff that sounds a little bit different than anything the band have done before, like on the title track where you have these stop-start rhythms and this kind of off-kilter riff. It still manages to feel pretty addictive despite feeling a little bit weirder than what the band usually do. There's a few ambient intros and outros on this album that only add to the cohesion, but beyond that, I don't really have a whole lot to say about Decomposed by Possession. Decomposed by Possession is just a great set of songs that work really well together as an album. I would say this is probably the most accessible Mortem release, and to me is extremely close to Demon Tales in terms of the ranking. I will rank Demon Tales a little bit higher and leave it in the number 2 spot, only because I think Demon Tales does have a little bit more of a creepy atmosphere than Decomposed by Possession, but all 3 of these albums are absolutely excellent, and Decomposed by Possession and Demon Tales are neck and neck in terms of the ranking. So in the early 2000s, the band members would move apart, with Alvaro, I believe, relocating to Arizona. So this made it harder for the band to rehearse, and because of that, the band would start to release material a lot more slowly. But nonetheless, the band would release their 4th album in 2005, De Natura Demonum. This was the band's first release for Iron Pegasus Records, and it feels like maybe with that new record label, the band were focused on making an album that had more flourishes to it. This album, for example, has an opening instrumental track, it has several interludes, and then you also have some interesting effects worked into some of these songs as well. Carcacha, Demon of Incest, is one of those interludes with some creepy keyboards and a demonic spoken word segment. And then the song Shadows That Pray to Asura has some pitch-shifted vocals in its mid section, which I guess is supposed to sound like a demon. There's nothing wrong with these flourishes, but I do kind of wish Mortem were able to match those flourishes with slightly better songs. The one thing I do have to say about this album is I just feel like the songwriting just isn't quite as good. You know, whereas a lot of the songs on the previous albums were collaborations between Fernan and Alvaro, for some reason many of these songs were written solely by Fernan, and perhaps that was because of the distance between him and his brother. But I almost wonder if that lack of collaboration had an effect on how the songs turned out, because I feel like a lot of these tracks have less notable riffs and less notable hooks than a lot of the tracks in the prior albums. And even the hooks that are here, I feel like, are just a little less engaging than the ones you got on some of the prior records. To me, songs like Dead Forms of Evil, Shadows That Pray to Asura, and One with the Dead are all pretty good, but they just kind of feel pretty similar to songs the band have done before, but when they did them before, they had better riffs and better songwriting. Now, to this album's credit, I do think there are some strong moments here, especially the title track, which has one of the catchiest riffs and choruses in the band's catalog. This song, I would say, is so catchy that it actually kind of overshadows everything else on the album to me. But nonetheless, there are other good cuts here as well. Its Tomb Leads to Hell, for example, stands out with kind of this bouncy mid-tempo riff and some really maniacal vocals in its closing section. And then the final track, Superstition, has some squawking notes that sound pretty wild, like something from Possessed Seven Churches. I will say that Superstition is a re-recording of a demo track, and considering I find it one of the strongest tracks on the album, I don't think that's a good sign when one of the best tracks on the album is a re-recording from almost 15 years prior. De Natura Demonum was the first Mortem album that I heard, so I definitely have a personal connection to it, and I still think it's a great album, but listening to their discography in full, I just can't help but feel that it's not quite as good as the first three albums. I feel like this might ruffle some feathers because I see people probably talk about this album more than any of their other albums, but I'm going to have to rank it below the first three albums, just because that reflects the fact that I don't enjoy it as much as those. Alright, so following De Natura Demonum, we had a pretty long gap between albums, 11 years to be specific, but Mortem would eventually return in 2016 with their fifth and latest album, Dinos Necromantis. Stylistically, Dinos Necromantis is actually more like Decomposed by Possession than De Natura Demonium. There's no standalone interludes on Dinos Necromantis, which I'm actually fine with because I think the music itself provides enough atmosphere. I would say most notably, however, Dinos Necromantis takes you back to that streamlined songwriting of Decomposed by Possession and does it pretty well, I think. The opening track, Angel of Apostasy, is a great example of that, which honestly sounds just like some of the catchier material from The Devil Speaks in Tongues and Decomposed by Possession. It's got a really memorable chorus, some peppy riffs, and then this really slow and menacing bridge that I just love. And fortunately, the other songs are enjoyable too, especially Horror of the Unliving, which has some really harrowing chords, a hammering pace, and even some eerie clean picking mixed in. Possessor of Lost Souls also hits pretty hard with riffs that just sound like they're scrambling over each other to escape your headphones and possess you. I like the frantic notes that you get on The Pain of Being Dead and Within the Woods. And then the closing track, A Crack and a Cursed Mirror, is also pretty neat. It's got some sustained notes during the chorus that I really like, and then an ending section that's just awesome, where you have a very long scream that turns into an echoing laugh and then just fades out. It's a really great way to end this record. I would say there definitely are some things that hold this album back, however, more so than any prior Mortem album, there are some riffs here that sound really similar to each other, and that's pretty notable in the tracks Horror of the Unliving and The Pain of Being Dead. Both of those songs feature an almost identical riff, and that's pretty noticeable given they're right next to each other in the track listing. There's also only 8 tracks here, and one of them is a cover of the Venom song Satanicus. I'm glad they picked a more obscure Venom song, because if they had covered Black Metal or Welcome to Hell, I probably would have just punched myself in the face. But even still, given it's been 11 years since the last Mortem album, I was kind of hoping for some more original material, especially because at 36 minutes, this is the shortest Mortem album, and you only have 7 original songs here. That said, overall, I really do like the streamlined approach on this album. There's a lot of inspiration and energy here. I think the songs pop a lot more than they did on De Natura Demonum, and because of that, I think I actually have to rank it slightly higher than De Natura Demonum, which feels really bad putting this album last because it's an excellent album, but when you have a band with a discography as strong as Mortem's, unfortunately, even really great albums have to end up in last place. But yeah, that's my Mortem ranking, and what a joy it was to make this list. This is such an excellent death metal band that I encourage everyone to check out. They are so pure and so atmospheric, and just convey such a sense of mystery. To me, anyone that likes the thrashier and more occult and more unpolished side of death metal needs to check this band out, and really you can't go wrong with any of their stuff. The one thing I will say is I do hope we see the band play live more. I was able to see them at Maryland Death Fest and Mass Destruction Fest a few years ago, which was an awesome experience. But hopefully we'll see a US tour from them at some point, and hopefully a new album as well, because these guys continue producing great material. But that'll do it for this video, guys. Let me know in the comments what you think of Mortem. Let me know what band you would like me to do a video of next. And as always, if you like this video, please subscribe. Please drop me a like. And if you want to see me talk about more death metal, check out this video over here, where I rank the albums of the Florida death metal band Solstice. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Thanks as always for tuning in, and I'll see you next week. Stay heavy.